Hello guys, you are welcome to OK Academy's e-learning, the first episode of our English language for grade 6. Alright, so our topic for this first episode is active and passive voices. Active and passive voice. So this is going to be the new topic for discussion. Okay, so in English, we have two main voices, which I have already mentioned. That is the active and then the passive voice. So somebody may ask, what is an active voice or what is a passive voice? Now, in our daily English speaking, we always use the first voice, which is the active voice. And in the active voice, as a normal sentence, we have a subject in the sentence, we have the verb, and then we have object. We have the subject, the verb, and then object in the sentence. So in the active voice, what happens is that the doer of the action, that is the verb, is always focused on. And then the object comes at the end of the sentence. So we have an example like John eats rice. John eats rice. So in this sentence, we have John being the subject. We have eats being the verb and rice being the object. Now, a quick revision of subject and then object. As we learned in our previous lessons, John, or the subject, is the one who is doing the action. And the action here is the eats. And then the object is the one who is suffering the action. So here John is doing the eating, and then rice is suffering the eating. So this is the normal voice. That is the active voice that we always use in our daily English speaking. So in active voices, we always have the subject coming first in the sentence, followed by the verb, and then the object. So this is an example of an active voice. Another example can be, my name is Uncle Gideon. My name is Uncle Gideon. My name is Uncle Gideon. Now let's take this sentence. My name being Uncle Gideon, in this sentence we are focusing on my name. Just as in the first sentence, the focus depends much on the subject. Here, our focus is on the my name and not the actual name. That is the active voice. I believe you are following. So, in the active voice, like I said earlier, our main focus is on the subject. The same thing applies to this sentence. The main focus is we want to know my name and not the actual name. Although this is what maybe the person wanted to know. But then, if we use the active voice, our focus is here. This should give you the clear picture of what I'm talking about. Though John is there, Rice is there, talking about two things. But our main focus in the active voice is on the subject. Please, is it clear? Thank you. So these and many more are what we refer to as the active voice. And when we come to the passive voice as well, this is where our attention or our focus shifts from the subject to the object. In the passive voice, our focus shifts from the subject to the object. Though we can still talk about the subject, but then our main focus will be on the object. And by so doing, their positions will have to change in the passive voice. So, the objects in the sentence will change place and take the position of the subject. And then the subject will change and take the position of the object. But in passive voices, what happens is that it is not compulsory that the subject will still appear in the sentence. It is not compulsory. So we have the long and then the short form of the passive voice. So we are going to look at some examples of the passive voice. So I'm going to change the first one. All right. So, like I said, this will change place, then this one will go there, and the verb will also change. Okay. So, the passive voice for this will then be Rice is eaten by John. Rice is eaten by John. And the second one, the passive voice will be Uncle Gideon. Uncle Gideon is my name. Uncle Gideon is my name. So here, the rice becomes the subject, and John here becomes the object. The same thing applies to the second one. Here, our focus is shifted from my name, and now we want to know the name, the real name, which is the Uncle Gideon. Please, I hope it is clear. All right. So, we can move on to how or the rules in passive voice. The rules in passive voice. Okay, so when you are changing an active voice to passive voice, take notes of these rules. Rules in passive voice. All right. Take note of these rules when you are changing an active voice to a passive voice. But one thing you should also not forget is verb tenses. We've already treated that. If you have forgotten any of them, then I'll urge you to go back and refer to your notes. Because in active and passive voices, we base on verb tenses. So the first rule in passive voice. Rule number one. If you took a clear look of the previous examples, when the rice took the place of John, the verb in the sentence changed. Very good. So, the first rule, subject or object in active voice takes the position of the subject. Object in active voice takes the position of the subject. We've already talked about that. So that is the first rule. Take note of it. And then rule number 2, or the second rule, is that in passive voice, the past participle form of the verb is always used. The past participle form of the verb is always used. That is all we use in the passive voice. No matter the form of the main verb. Okay, so let's add it there. Of the main verb. Let me add it there. Of the main verb. The past participle form of the main verb is always used. In passive voice, the past participle form of the main verb in the sentence is always used. For example, if you have the verb to eat, that will be the main verb in the sentence. And so therefore, when you are changing it to passive voice, the verb should change to past participle, which is eaten. Eaten. So don't forget the past participle, that is what we refer to as the V3. V3. Don't forget that. I hope you remember. V3. So the past participle form of the main verb is always used. And then another point too, the subject. The subject in the active voice. In the active voice is, in the active voice, which is now, which is now the object, is introduced by in the passive. Okay. The subject in active voice, which is now the object, is introduced by this word by. By. In the passive voice. So if you look at the first example, rice is eaten by John. Rice is eaten by John. So take note of this. So the first one, we say that the object now becomes the subject. The second one, we say that the main verb uses the past participle form. And the third one, the subject, which is now the object in the passive voice, is introduced by this word by. And I've given you an example here. Rice is eaten by John. At this point, take a break, go through from top to down, and then make sure you understand everything. So the next thing we are going to talk about, aside these three rules, as we progress, if any of the rules come up, I'll make sure I alert you. So the next thing, as I said earlier, we are using the verb tense forms. Verb tense forms to change active voices to passive voices. So if a sentence is in the simple present tense form, how do I change it to passive? If a sentence is in the simple past tense form, how do I change it to passive? If a sentence is in the present progressive form, that is the present continuous form, how do I change it to passive voice? So, we are going to treat 3 of them in this episode, and then in the subsequent episodes, we will treat the rest. So first and foremost, let's talk about the simple present. The simple present. Now, how do we change a simple present tense form of an active voice to the passive voice? And this is it. We know that in active or passive voices, or in the simple present tense form, the verb or the helping verb is, are, or am are not used. They are not used in simple present tense form. They are rather used in the present progressive form. So when we were doing tenses, I remember we said that the bare form of the verb is what we use in the simple present tense. So what happens is that if you are changing the simple present tense to passive, then we are going to take one of these, either is or are or am. Is when the subject is singular, are when the subject is plural, and then am when we are using the first person singular, that is I. Okay, so we use either of these alongside with the V3. Don't forget, when I say V3, it means the past participle of the main verb. Okay, so I'm going to use the first example we cited. That was John eats rice. This is the active voice where this is subject. We have the verb and then we have the object. So this being active, when we are changing it to the passive, the rule says we should use is, are, or am plus the past participle. And don't forget, in the first rule, we say that the subject and the object will have to switch positions. So, this changing to passive voice, rice comes first. Rice. Followed by either of these. Rice is, we are using is because rice is an uncountable noun. and uncountable nouns concord or agrees with the subject singular verb. So rise is V3 of the main verb. So rise is eating. By, in the last rule, or the third rule we talked about, by John. So rise now becomes the subject, John now becomes the object. And then the main verb changes to V3. But in the first, or the active voice, the main verb is V1. The verb there is V1. So V1 now changes to V3. Subject and object switch positions. Do you understand this? I believe you do. Let's take another example. Example 2. So this is example 1. Now example 2. Kojo drives tractor. Kojo drives tractor. Kojo is the subject, V1, and here, object. Kojo drives tractor. So the rule, tractor now becomes the subject. So tractor now becomes subject. Tractor is singular. So is drives. The past participle of drive is driven. Tractor is driven by Kojo, which is now the object, V3. It is that simple, right? Sure. So Kojo drives tractor. Tractor is driven by Kojo. So here is the active, and here the passive voice. So the rule for simple present tense is very simple. Is, are, or am plus the V3. V3 of the verb or the main verb, then plus by, and then plus the object. Can I move on to the next? All right. So number 2. Number 2. Today I want to deal with the simple forms. So simple present, then we move on to the simple past. Simple past. So the rule for the simple past tense is also very simple. Since you know the rule for the simple present, you just change these auxiliaries or modal verbs to past tense. So the rule now becomes was or were plus V3. It's just as simple as that. Was or were plus V3. But then, just to help you, let me add this to it. Plus by. Okay, plus by, plus object. Let me add these to it. Plus by, plus object. Okay. Now, I want to make this thing simple for you so that straight away you can look at this and then you change it. The object here, don't forget, it is not the object in the active voice. The object here is the subject in the active voice. When you go to when you come to the active voice, the subject there, that has been changed to the object here. Take note of that. Don't confuse yourself with it. The subject in the active voice has changed to this object. Very good. So we use was or were plus V3 plus by plus object for the passive voice of simple past tense. So I'm going to use the same sentences as examples. John ate rice. In the active, John ate rice. John is the subject. V2. It is V2 because it is past tense. Because it is past tense. So V2. Now rice becomes the object, or rice is the object. So when we are changing this straight to the passive voice, rice was or were singular, so we use was. V3 of 8 is eaten by the object, that is the subject in the active voice, by John. So rice becomes the subject, eating becomes V3, John is the object. So this is the simple past tense form of the passive voice. All right, second example. Kojo drove tractor. Kojo drove tractor. Kojo being the subject, V2, and tractor being the object. When we are changing it, it will now become tractor, still singular, so was driven by Kojo. So driven, V3, object. Okay, so John ate rice, we've done that. Kojo drove tractor. Now tractor was driven by Kojo. Tractor was driven by Kojo. This is very simple. Very simple. The last but not the least for this episode is the simple future. The simple future. I remember one student said futuri instead of future. Futuri. All right, so the rule for simple future. Here we have will plus be plus V3 plus by plus object. Will plus be plus V3 plus by plus object. This is the rule for the simple future tense. So straight away, let's take example. So, the first example, John will eat rice. So when we are changing it to the passive, straight away, rice will be eaten by John. Rice will be eaten by John. So here John was subject, V1, object. Here rice becomes subject, V3, and then object. I believe you understand all these. So at this point, I'll bring this episode to a close. See you again in our next episode. I'm Uncle Gideon, your English facilitator. Stay home, stay safe. Don't forget to keep washing your hands under running water with soap. Have a nice day.